Welcome into Road to the Draft presented by Raymond James. Casey Phillips here with senior writer and editor Scott Smith. And I know last week when we did one of these, we focused on the impact free agency could potentially be having on what the Bucs would be looking to do in the draft. Now we figured we'd talk about the impact not having a combine could have, but the fact that there are still pro days. And so those are going to take a lot of extra importance as compared to maybe even some other years. But now knowing this is it, this is what you got to work with. So, some of these early pro days, have you felt like you've been able to learn a few things and what it might mean for this draft?
Yeah, you're right about the absence of the combine. And I know a lot of people will debate the importance of the combine when it all comes down to it, but it does tend to solidify the feelings about some players, the scouting reports about some players, which affects mock drafts quite a bit. And we don't have that this year. So these pro days do take on a bit more importance. And there's a lot of restrictions there too. Like you can only have 3 representatives from your club at any given pro day. So it's still restricted, but they're probably more important. And I think one of the first things we've learned from the pro days we've seen so far, and there's a lot more still to come, is that the offensive tackle depth in this draft is really, really deep. Last year, it was very top heavy. There was those 4 top prospects, of which at least so far it looks like the Bucs got the best one in Tristan Wirfs. It's not quite as top heavy this year, but there are so many good prospects that it goes very deep, probably into the second round, and guys that teams are really going to want. And those guys have done a great job in their pro days so far. The Bucs probably wouldn't have any shot at Rashad Slater from Northwestern, but man, he nailed it in his bench press and his 40. He's at 96 percentile or higher in both of those. So he's strong and fast. And while we're on the topic of Northwestern, which is near and dear to my heart, cornerback Greg Newsome did awesome too. So he's really solidifying himself as perhaps the 3rd cornerback off the board. But back to the tackles, Sam Cosmi of Texas, he bench pressed 36 times, which is amazing. He was also in the 98th percentile in the broad jump, the 40, the shuttle. So he really helped himself. And he's a guy you've been seeing barely on the fringes of the first round. North Dakota State, people want to see Trey Lance, the quarterback, but they've got a tackle there named Dylan Radunz, who's also had a really good Senior Bowl and was good in agility drills in his pro day. And then we'll talk a little bit more about Alabama's Alex Leatherwood in a little bit. But the point is the Buccaneers may be in a position to take a luxury pick in the first couple rounds. And to me, a tackle for the future is exactly the definition of a luxury pick.
And I know the focus tends to be on the first round. That's always what everybody does most of the mock drafts for. It's what people pay the most attention to. But we have seen, especially in recent years, how much that 2nd, 3rd round, that area, the Bucs have done a great job. And those can be some major impact players. So have any of these pro days given you an indication of maybe some of these 2nd and 3rd round guys that could still be really important, even if we haven't heard as much about it?
Yeah, we so often forget when we're talking about the draft how important, especially the day 2 picks are in the 2nd and 3rd round. I mean, Ali Marpet, Antoine Winfield, most of the cornerbacks on the team, the safeties, most of them are 2nd and 3rd round picks of recent vintage. And, what happens in these pro days also, it would have happened at the combine, is that guys tend to solidify that they're a day 2 pick. Or if they're a player that seems to be on the bubble between the 2nd and the 1st round, they can, as the saying goes, get themselves into the 1st round. And a guy I'd like to emphasize is Greg Stokes, a cornerback from Georgia. He had a great pro day, showed he had long arms, had a great vertical jump, great broad jump. And it makes me think of Carlton Davis and Sean Murphy-Bunting. And those were both guys that had questions going into their pro days in their respective years. And Carlton Davis ran really well at the Auburn pro day in his draft year. And Sean Murphy-Bunting had guys from every NFL team at his pro day at Central Michigan, and he showed really, really well, was good in agility drills. And both those guys solidified themselves as 2nd-round picks, and as we've seen, they were worth it. So that can happen. And then, we talked about the Bucs maybe adding an edge rusher at 32, and there's a lot of guys that are right on the bubble. And Texas's Joseph Osai really showed a lot of athleticism, but really wasn't very strong in his pro day, in the bench press. So there's still questions whether he's a 1st or 2nd round pick. And another guy that could be available on day 2 as an edge rusher is Pittsburgh's Rashad Weaver. He didn't run real well in the 40, but he's real good in like 3-cone and shuttle drills. So these are guys that have question marks about him, but showed a little bit at the pro day, but maybe not enough to jump into the 1st round.
All right. And then finally, you mentioned briefly the Alabama pro day happened, at least the first one. And of course, whenever Alabama has a pro day, people are watching. So what did we learn from that?
Yeah, I mean, you have to go to Alabama's pro days, or there's two of them. There's another one a week from now. They have so many prospects. You might see 5 or 6 or 7 Alabama guys drafted in the first round. So the Buccaneers aren't going to get their hands on Jalen Waddle or Devontae Smith or Mac Jones, but there's so many guys there that there will be some available that might be of interest to the Bucs in later rounds, including running back Najee Harris, depending upon how the running backs go out. But he didn't work out, so we really don't know. Maybe he'll work out in their second pro day on March 30th. Christian Barmore is a defensive lineman that most mock drafts have coming off before pick 32, but sometimes he makes it to the end. He ran really good for a guy his size. He's like 6'3" and 313 pounds. He didn't bench press, but maybe he will a week from now. And then I said we talk about Alex Leatherwood. That's a tackle that you're only seeing in a few mock drafts in the first round, but he did a really good job in the broad jump and the vertical leap. And he looked really good in positional drills. So maybe that's a guy, as we were talking about, if the Bucs make a luxury pick, maybe first round, maybe second round, it's a guy that could be on their board.
All right. Well, that'll do it for us on this edition of Road to the Draft presented by Raymond James. We'll be back each week leading up to the draft, figuring out all the new topics based on what has happened that week and how it could affect what the Buccaneers are going to do in this year's draft. We'll see you next time.